Hi-de-ho, in this supplemental video that is an install tips and tricks for the Black Max series by the Bush Company rooftop tent or Cascadia vehicle tents. Cascadia vehicle tents, I think they did a bulk order or they're an authorized distributor. I'm not actually sure what the business deal looks like for them, but we ordered through CVT or Cascadia vehicle tents this rooftop tent, which is closed up above us, but it's actually manufactured, by the Bush Company. We were one of the first ones. I think we were their second order of these, but I don't think too many in the U.S. actually got these because shortly, while this was on truck and en route to me, I got an email from CVT that was giving some hints and tricks to installations. Before that, I knew I wanted the tent for a lot of features. I'm not going to go over that here. Up over my head over here is the other half of this video where we talk about our full overlanding rig. I pull out my awning and I kind of go over everything. But in that, I mentioned that I wanted to do this tips and tricks and things that I learned while I was doing this installation. And that's exactly what this is. So without further ado, the first thing that you're going to have to deal with is the mass and the weight. I am blessed enough to have a 2-post lift on the other side of the truck, and I was able to use that by putting a couple of 2x4s across the legs. I'll show you a picture over there what that looked like. And with our truck not lifted, it lifted up to just a perfect height where we were able to put it off the back, and then my wife and I were able to jockey it across the 2x4s and onto these rails. I won't lie to you, even having it at the right height and jockeying it across, it was about all that my wife and I wanted to handle alone. Shipping weight on this, according to CVT, was 285 pounds, but en route to us, it was actually reweighed by truck a couple of times, by the trucking company, the LTL company, and 2 times they had it at 300 and 1 time at 350. So there isn't a lot of packaging to come off of this. At some point, the freight company did add a skid to it where it was shipped over the pond to us in basically a thick cardboard box. So it was a substantial cardboard box, but it's just a cardboard box. Plan on not only working with 285 to 300 pounds, but also it's a pretty good size. And it's a little awkward because you're kind of reaching out over a vehicle. So make some arrangements like that. For me to take this off, I'm probably still going to do something with my 2-post lift, but I'm thinking about either using the handles that are on the front and rear of the tent itself, or it actually has some rails on the top for a rack, for a roof rack that you could put on the tent. And I might see if I can use those. I think those are only rated for like 150 pounds though, so I don't know if they're actually rated and secured enough to support the tent, whereas I know the handles will, because that's actually how I picked it up and moved it around. The other thing that I would like to mention is this came with absolutely zero literature. There was not a single piece of paper or anything to make head nor tails out of the hardware. In fact, if it hadn't been for my research ahead of time and looking at install videos from the Bush Company, and they have some great install videos, I wouldn't have understood the mounting or anything there associated with it. To that end, if you go to look at the install videos on the Bush Company's website, these aluminum mounting rails that are up here are actually shown 90 degrees out. So they are shown going across the tent like this. Now, why is that significant? Well, the Bush Company actually recommends that you have at least 3 rails that you are supporting this particular tent brand on. That's not that possible for a lot of people. It's not for me with a 5.5-foot bed and the rack system that I have chosen, and it's frankly not all that common in the US. Overseas, Australia, Africa, those kind of places, they tend to use gutter rail systems on some of their 4-wheel drives, and it's really easy just to add multiple rails. It's not so much, at least a common feature here in the US. What I had done to combat that is I actually had purchased and had here ahead of time what was once longer. I purchased 3 of these 1/8-inch wall 2x1 aluminum tubing. And what I was going to do was mount these again longer. I was going to put 3 across it to supply the 3 rails that the Bush Company said that they wanted. And then these rails would span the 2 that I have. All was going to be well along with that. That even would have aligned with the hardware that you get along with the tent, which is essentially 6 mounting plates and then 12 bolts, washers, and nuts to mount into this extrusion. What I was surprised by when I got this tent, and I don't know if this is a new series change from the Bush Company or if this is a request that CVT made, but these mounting rails are running the opposite direction. That means my whole plan to add these 3 was no longer possible. It made mounting to the original Yakima rails easier, but now I only had 2 points. Looking at the construction and the sturdiness of it, I wasn't originally worried about it. However, when we got up in the tent, when it was first on, there is some significant deflections in the flooring and in these rails. While it's quite heavy, I believe this is from the Bush Company trying to reduce weight where they can. I don't think it's deflecting enough where it's any kind of concern or problem. It's just different than what I'm used to with some other rooftop tents I've seen. So since I already had this aluminum, what I did, I'll show another video over there, is I essentially made these piggyback rails. So I put this rail and I notched a hole in this end, and I piggybacked up against its mounting rails to basically add some support. I will tell you that I only did that on the center 2 rails of the 4 that are available, but it added a tremendous amount of rigidity. In fact, initially when my wife got up in it, when we were doing some setup, I saw quite a bit of deflection. Just with those 2 rails, we saw 0 at all in the rails itself, and the floor was minimized as well. So if you're spanning 2 rooftop rack rails, I do highly recommend doing something to add additional support with that deflection. Again, the Bush Company does recommend 3 rails, so I'm actually trying to work around that a little bit. Because I used more rails, I also then came short on hardware, and I had to add some additional plates and brackets. I just made those myself out of 2 by 1/4 inch stock and made them very similarly to what they needed. That's really pretty much it, other than one thing I will mention about the hardware. It ships with M8 by 125 stainless bolts, all stainless hardware, good for them. They're full thread all the way up, and they're about 80 millimeters long. When you lock those into the tray and you slide them in, even with my pretty fat rail, there was quite a bit of thread that I had to run up. There was about 1 inch to 1.5 inches left over. I thought I'd be smart, and I thought I'd grab my drill with a deep well socket and kind of run it up quickly close. And on 3 separate bolts, about 3/4 of the way along with that, they suddenly seized, never to go forward or reverse again. In fact, I ended up having to cut them off and go down to the hardware store to get some replacement bolts for that. Every single one from that point on, and the remainders I just did by hand and dealt with the fact that I was ratcheting for a while, and everything went just fine. I think that I actually got the bolt so hot that the Teflon might have gone away, it might have galled up a little bit and seized it, but when it did, it was done completely. So I do not recommend running up with anything automated. Just get your good old wrist muscles going and tighten it down that way. Other potential issues, we thought would be smart and save the like 3 pounds or whatever, and not do the gas struts until the tent was on the roof, and then install the gas struts that open it both directions. That was a colossal mistake. I wish that while it was on the skid or on the ground, I had gone ahead and installed the gas struts. I highly recommend you do that. It takes really 2 people. I did it myself, but I left part of my insides on the outsides when I was done, trying to hold this thing up for my wife to start the bolts on those struts after the fact. It was a bad idea, so I do highly recommend. In the end, what I ended up using is we have a telescoping, kind of like a Chinese handcuff hood prop, and I was able to put it down on one side, and while I'd lift up, it would not allow it to go back down. So I could lift and it would then lock, and I'd lift and then it would lock, and it went almost high enough to where when I needed to take a little break, I was able. So I've showed you some pictures along the way, I've showed you some videos, but there's some gotchas to watch out when you're installing this. I can only presume that the Black series, the normal clamshell, as well as the Alpha series that's being sold through CVT will probably have some modifications as well. I do wish that someone had provided some amount of paperwork. I've installed a lot of stuff and I can normally figure my way through it, but it's always nice to have that piece of paper. The other thing you may want to do that I ended up doing, because I seized up those bolts, there is only a single entry along these rails to enter the bolts. So essentially you rock them in, you kind of snap them down into place through a small hole in the channel, and then you slide the bolts where you want to go. That means that once it's on for me, I had to get some bolts close. I picked up the tent by one end and my wife jockeyed 4 bolts to the other side, and then we did that for the front as well. Because I seized up some bolts, I later came back through and drilled out some additional holes on the opposite sides of the rails, so now I can get those bolts on or off without having to worry about lifting over this piece here. So that's the additional tips and tricks. I know this was pretty boring. Hopefully this information was beneficial. I am loving the tent, the fit and finish inside, as well as we've had actually a couple of rooftop tents before. I was concerned about the foam that was in this because of the depth. The other tents that we've had a similar thickness foam, and we always added an extra mat or got like one of those toppers that you could get for like a bed at home, and we added some additional foam to it for some extra depth. This foam density seems to be amazing. At that same depth, my knees are not ever touching the bottom. I'm a bigger guy. I'm a side sleeper. My hip isn't making it to the bottom, so all top-notch stuff. I can't wait to get out there and use this some. Hopefully you find this beneficial. That's it. If you did, hit the like and subscribe, but to be fair, this isn't my normal type of video. Normally I'm out exploring and doing some photography and videography stuff, so this was just what I had learned so far and thought I could help. If you're interested in my other stuff, make sure you hit the bell twice so you get alarm notifications, and I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.